January 4th, 2021, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We had a bill today regarding abortion, and when I think about saving lives of innocent babies, one name that comes to mind is Henry Hyde, and another name that comes to my mind is Chris Smith. We have some people that have worked tirelessly, selflessly on this issue, and one of those people is Chris Smith. He's a leader, and I am proud to yield all the time he may use to my friend, Mr. Smith.
And thank him for his leadership. I thank Kathy Morris Rogers for her extraordinary efforts on behalf of the Unborn. It has been, frankly, a team effort, and what a team. Mr. Speaker, the legislation under consideration by the House today is deceptively titled the Women's Health Protection Act of 2021. Abortion is not health care unless one construes the precious life of an unborn child to be analogous to a tumor to be excised or a disease to be vanquished. This bill is far outside the American mainstream and goes far beyond Roe versus Wade. This bill constitutes an existential threat to unborn children and to the value of life itself. For the first time ever by congressional statute, H.R. 3755 would legally authorize and enable the violent death of unborn baby girls and boys by dismemberment, decapitation, forced expulsion from the womb, deadly poisons, and other methods at any time and for any reason until birth. A significant majority of Americans are deeply concerned about protecting the lives of unborn children. A 2021 Marist poll found that 65% of Americans want Roe versus Wade reinterpreted by either sending the issue back to the states or to stop legalized abortion. Of that 65% majority of Americans, 40% of Democrats would, quote, allow certain restrictions on abortions as determined by each state. If enacted, this bill will nullify nearly every modest pro-life restriction ever enacted by the states, including women's right to know laws in 35 states, parental involvement statutes in 37 states, pain-capable unborn child protection laws in 19 states, waiting periods in 26 states, and so much more. 70% of Americans, Mr. Speaker, according to the 2021 Marist poll, oppose abortion if the child will be born with Down syndrome. With over half of those who identify as pro-choice, 56%, opposed or strongly opposed to abortion due to the expectation a child will be born with Down syndrome. Americans seek to embrace and not erase those babies identified as having an extra chromosome. H.R. 3755, however, overturns state laws that protect children with Down syndrome. Regarding international law, the bill falsely states that, quote, core human rights treaties ratified by the United States protect access to abortion. That is absolutely untrue. In fact, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which the United States has ratified, is concerned about unborn children being killed. It states in Article 6 that, quote, every human being has the inherent right to life, and that, quote, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his life, close quote. It goes on to declare that the sentence of death, in other words, capital punishment, shall not be carried out on pregnant women. Why? The ICCPR creates an exemption from execution for pregnant women, recognizing that their unborn children have an independent claim to legal protection, as do all unborn children. Many women have been seriously harmed by abortion. The Silent No More awareness campaign and many other initiatives throughout this country, and this never gets reported on by the press, never gets focused upon so that people are more aware of these helps that are out there, both within the church as well as in a non-sectarian point of view, to help women who are post-abortive and who are suffering, and suffering so immensely. A few years ago, Linda Shrewsbury, an academic African-American with a degree from Harvard who had an abortion, said at an event right here on Capitol Hill, and I quote, "The lies that brought me to that day and its sorrowful aftermath are crystal clear in my mind. Falsehoods and deceptions that concealed the truth about abortion. Lies planted into my thinking by clever marketing, media campaigns, and endless repetition led to a tragic, irreversible decision, the death of my first child." She goes on to say, "I really didn't understand back then. At age 20, Linda goes on, I had no inkling of the mental and emotional darkness I was about to enter. I couldn't have grasped the immense psychological toll abortion would take for years and into the future. Unrelenting tears, guilt, shame, depression. After spending many years in denial, I did eventually find healing. When I understood and rejected distortions about fetal development, doublespeak about choice, rights, planned and wanted children, I understood the reality and victimhood of my aborted child. I understood the absence of moral basis for choosing to disentitle an innocent human being of life. When I embraced the truth set me free, and I finally gained an inner peace." Linda Shrewsbury goes on to say, "It's past time to lance the national wound of abortion with truth. The high culture, thought leaders, media, celebrities that brought us abortion seemed vested beyond extraction. I dreamed of a volcano of abortion truth that would erupt one day from the grassroots, women and men and their relatives witnessing to their suppressed emotion, unspoken trauma, and lived pain. With abortion denial ended, we as a society could then reconnect with reality and with life." Mr. Speaker, the United States Supreme Court majority in 1973 in Roe v. Wade wrote, and I quote him in pertinent part, "We need not resolve the difficult question of when human life begins," close quote. Sidestepping that threshold question and giving no benefit of the doubt to the child, they went on to legalize and enable abortion on demand. For decades, right up to this very moment, abortion advocates have gone to extraordinary lengths to ignore, trivialize, and cover up the battered baby victim. But today, thanks to ultrasound, unborn babies are more visible than ever before. When a woman is carrying a child, the first baby pictures, those that often end up on the refrigerator in celebration, are of the ultrasound pictures, not of the newborns, they follow later, but of the ultrasound pictures of that little boy or that little girl or the twins. Today, science informs us that birth is an event, albeit a very important one, but an event in the life of a child. It's not the beginning of life. Modern science today also treats unborn children with disability or disease as a patient in need of diagnosis and treatment. And there's been an explosion in interventions that have saved children's lives and mitigated many, many problems that they may face. How the disability, for example, was not caught early. Unborn babies are society's youngest patients and deserve benign, life-affirming medical interventions. All unborn babies deserve our respect and our love, not death by abortion. I yield back.
I appreciate so much my friend Chris Smith's dedication to this important. It's not just an issue, it is an important cause. Just so important. You know, we're told, in law school that there can be nothing more noble than speaking up for those who are unable to defend themselves. And that's what I see when I see my friend, Mr. Smith. But this bill we took on today to vote on it allows abortion right up to the moment of birth. And I struggle with that. I mean, I understand there are people that really believe, okay, it's not a child, it's just a mass of tissue. But when the child can be seen, as we were talking about earlier, before we began the special order, you know, when you look at the TV screen, you know that's your child, and it is a child. You can make out all the parts. Then it's not just a mass of tissues, but for heaven's sake, when it's a viable, living child, capable of living completely on that child's own. I've seen some tough things as a felony judge, some pictures which I wish I'd never seen. But to see what's done to a living child in the name of a right is just heartbreaking. And I appreciate so much my friend's heart on this issue. You care to share anything else?
Thank you, I'm a good friend from Texas. Thank you for your leadership. I do believe, and I see this, I know it's not represented on the floor of this House when it comes to our good friends and colleagues on the Democrat side, but there is a serious movement in the direction of embracing life, including the unborn child. Like I said, some of those polls that have come out of recent date, if you just ask the question pro-choice versus pro-life, you don't get much insight. But when you break it down under what circumstances that child's life could be lost to abortion, huge majorities, not just for late-term abortion opposition, but huge majorities in America are clearly trending in favor of life. And that's, like I mentioned, with those with Down syndrome. I mean, 70% want that child to be given life. And for those who are without Down syndrome, there's huge majorities as well. On funding, not only the Marist poll, but the other polls show as well that 6 out of 10 Americans do not want their funding, taxpayer dollars being used for funding of abortion. And just a few weeks ago, we passed legislation and appropriations bills during the summer that are pending over on the Senate side that would eviscerate the Hyde Amendment, an amendment I first offered in 1983 called the Federal Employees Health Benefits Program Abortion Ban, legislation that to say that taxpayers don't want to be complicit in, as I said before, chemical poisoning, dismemberment, abortions, the methods that are used routinely by the abortionists to kill that baby. You know, it's an assault on life. It's an assault on the weakest and the most vulnerable. And we need to be caring for the weakest and the most vulnerable. You hold a little child in your hand, and especially if you go to a NICU unit and look at these preemies, and you know that personally, Louie, through your personal experience, you look at those children, they are in desperate need of love and concern and good medical interventions that affirm their life and not take it. And they're just so helpless. And I think people, you know, all the glib talk about choice to do what? Kill a baby. And I think we have to be so honest. And as I said with Linda's story, and there are thousands of stories like that of women who have been harmed. You know, often there's relief when the abortion is over, not all the time, but it kicks in over time when, you know, either whatever method was used or just, you know, how old would that child be today? And the beauty of these outreaches to post-abortive women is that they're non-judgmental. It's all about loving the woman and helping the woman. And I know many, my wife Marie and I know many post-abortive women. Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King, had 2 abortions. She is now strongly pro-life, and she made the statement in a speech where she said, how can we honor the legacy and the dream of her uncle, Martin Luther King, if we murder the babies? But she and so many others reach out in love and compassion to those women and say, you know, that's over. Yes, the baby's gone. but we love you and we care for you. And I've been in this movement, the pro-life movement, for 49 years. Got involved in 1972, in my first year in college. I often thought that if people just knew the truth, like Linda said in her testimony, they would run out of the abortion clinics. Bernard Nathanson, the founder of NARAL, one of the biggest pro-abortion organizations in the country. He's one of three who founded it, Lawrence Lader and Betty Friedan. Bernard Nathanson wrote in the New England Journal of Medicine, "I've come to the agonizing conclusion that I have presided over 60,000 deaths." And he became a pro-lifer. Wow. And he said, if wombs had windows, and that's what ultrasound is, we can now see that child moving, sucking his or her thumb, and it just explodes the myth that somehow these children are not human and alive. They have a wake-sleep cycle, and of course they exchange the breathing that they've been doing with the amniotic fluid and the build up their lungs for air at birth. So it's the magnificent continuum of life that starts at conception. And again, as I said a moment ago, birth is an event. It's just an event that happens in the life. And we have many events. That's a big one. We all remember our birthday, but it's not the beginning of life. And these children deserve respect. So I thank you, Louie, for your leadership. But I say, to anyone who may be listening, there's Project Rachel within the Catholic Church. There's the Silent No More awareness campaign, and all of these efforts being made across the country and world to reach out to post-abortive women. And then there's the pregnancy care centers, some 3,000 of them throughout the country that do nothing but say, we love them both. We want mother and baby to be assisted, and that includes after the child is born. Right. And I've gotten to know many of those people. They're mostly women who run them. It is all about love in action, and they care so completely for those women and their families, and they stay with them. Some of the women who run them, some are post-abortive themselves, so they know the agony that could occur if the abortion is procured. So, the pro-life movement is all about affirming life in a non-judgmental way. And like I said, I've been in it for about half a century. We need to do more. We need to reclaim the protection of life in our law and policy.
Well, I appreciate so much a friend talking about loving the ones alive, the baby, the mother, because so often the focus is only on mothers that have had an abortion and good for them, and not on those times when their hearts are deeply broken, and that love needs to nurture and care for them. I'm just grateful that we worship a God that believes in second chances, and there's nothing that we can do to separate us from that love. But I had the privilege of hearing a lady named Ramona Trevino, and she was, and I was fortunate to have her. I was guest hosting somebody's radio show and had her on so that more people could hear her story. Amazing. She's a brilliant person. But she was at the top of her class in high school, and I believe it was at 15 she became pregnant. But in the Hispanic community, they had looked at her as, a rising star, going to be a great leader. And then she became pregnant, and there were those that encouraged her to go ahead and have abortion. She didn't. But she was so smart. Eventually, there was an opening she saw for director of Planned Parenthood in Sherman, Texas. And so she applied. And because she was obviously so smart, she got the job. And she continued to raise her daughter. But they were being taught, and they were teaching the people that worked at Planned Parenthood that the most important statistic that the directors reviewed in their directors' meetings were, how many young girls are you able to get on birth control pill, that was a more important number than how many abortions you did that much. The big money came from the abortions, of course, but the number that they really pushed at the directors' meetings, how young are you getting them on the pill, and how many are you getting on birth control pills? And to do that, they were trained to tell the child, look, your mother obviously, I'm sure, will not approve of this, and you don't have to tell her. This is between you and me, and I will keep your confidence. I will let you know that I'm your friend and I'll be here for you. And it was building to, as they were taught, the younger you get a girl on birth control pills, the more likely she is to forget someday and become pregnant. And that's when they made the big bucks off the abortion. And it began to bother so much Ramona that they were teaching their employees to come between somebody like her and her own daughter. And then to really affirmatively get young girls on birth control pills because they were more likely to forget and get pregnant, encouraging them to have a really wild sexual life so that they could get pregnant, became more than she could take, and she had to leave her position. It was just too much. And she sounded the alarm on that for years. But just the idea that you use dishonesty to try to make a customer, not a patient, but a customer, out of a young child, that in laws all over the country we say this person is not legally eligible to make a binding contract without adult advice and supervision. And yet that's where the focus is. Get those girls pregnant so that we can make money on an abortion. It is...
Well,
the
parental involvement laws, which would be overturned by this legislation, deal with abortion, not with birth control, just with abortion. There's a bright line of demarcation between the two. And I remember meeting with a woman from Virginia who testified here on Capitol Hill. And at the time, she called her group Mothers Against Minors Abortion. And the way she discovered that her daughter had an abortion was when she was hemorrhaging in her bed. She went into the young girl's room and was shocked to find that she was, very, very, very at risk, and quickly got her to the hospital. And thankfully, things turned out okay. The modest bills that would be overturned by this legislation. I'm the prime sponsor of the bill here in this House of the ban for pain-capable, to protect pain-capable children. We've had votes on that in the past. Trent Franks sponsored that in the past. And, that's at 20 weeks. And we know beyond any reasonable doubt that at least at 20 weeks and maybe before, an unborn child feels pain. Dr. Sunny Anand, who's not even a pro-life pain specialist, has said that sometimes that pain can be far in excess of what a newborn or any of us would feel because the pain receptors are so close to the skin, to the exposed area, so that when the dismemberment process begins and the arm or the leg or some other body part is literally hacked off that child, and that's what, nobody wants to talk, they talk about choice, and obscures the fact that it is a violent procedure. And as that is happening, the child feels pain. And until that child, either through shock or death, no longer feels it, and then the dismemberment abortion goes on, and they don't feel it anymore. But I don't like pain. I don't think anybody in this chamber, it's why we take analgesics and all kinds of pain relievers to mitigate pain when we feel it. That child gets no such intervention, and he or she suffer excruciatingly painful process as they are being dismembered. So, we need this, we need a national debate on abortion like never before. And the news media needs to cease its enabling of a narrative that is truly false, that completely trivializes the unborn child, acts as if they don't exist, because obviously they do. And we need to be, I think, trying to protect the weakest and most vulnerable. And I do think, I hope we have many more debates like today, not less, but more. The more light and scrutiny that's brought to this issue, and the more women who speak up who have been harmed, and again, like I said, many of these women have done that. At the annual March for Life, several of the Silent No More awareness women, and what courage that takes to stand up and not only tell your story, but and often with family in present, to see this. So, we are really, hopefully, going to pivot. I know that our friends on the other side of the aisle, and I do respect them, I believe that we need to always keep it civil, but again, to those children, they're facing a death sentence. And as someone who is against capital punishment, even when there's a commission of a capital crime, capital punishment for the unborn must end. And I thank you, and I yield back to my friend.
I appreciate my friend so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know there was I saw the podium out on the steps. Going to be a great celebration for women. I was a little surprised because I was thinking we weren't supposed to talk about genders like men and women, father, mother, and all that under Speaker Pelosi's rules. But anyway, apparently it's okay today. But it's hard to think about rejoicing that we're going to get to keep taking the lives of the most innocent among us. And I know the big hearts of some of my friends on the other side, and knowing their big hearts, it's sometimes amazing to think you surely can't feel good about this. In judiciary hearing some years back, we had a doctor testify who did late-term abortions up until his daughter was in a car wreck, and he became so nauseous when he went to do another abortion that he couldn't do them anymore. And I have, like I said, in my days as a judge, I've seen pictures I wish I could get out of my mind. I recall one young lady that was a victim, and she'd been put in a 50-gallon barrel, try to hide her body, lime poured on, and they couldn't tell was this limb removed while she was alive, or is it from deterioration? But this doctor said when it comes to the late-term abortion, the child is clearly too big to remove from the womb without assistance. And he described in much more detail than I'll be able to go into, but taking a clamp and feeling inside the womb till you find what you know is a limb, arm or leg, clamping on, ripping the arm or leg from the child at a time, like Mr. Smith said, they absolutely do feel great pain, perhaps more than an adult. Ripping one, then you continue to feel for a limb and rip off another until you've done that 4 times. And then his word, you feel for something bulbous at that point. then you know you have the child's head. You crush the head and then pull what's left out and dispose of it. There are just too many big hearts on the other side of the aisle not to at some point realize that that's something we probably should not be doing. Very, very tragic. And I remember, reading in the Bible as I was young, and the verses from the Old Testament about parents putting their child in an idol's hand, flames leaping up, so that the child could be burned to death, and that they began to be desensitized to the screams of the children as they burned to death. And I thought, that's inconceivable, especially that a parent could do that to a child. But when you hear about late-term abortions, and you hear some of the things that our society is doing in the name of freedom and rights, I believe in God, but hypothetically, let's say anybody that doesn't, you just believe in karma, don't believe in God. Is it conceivable that good karma could come from tearing arms and legs off an innocent child who hasn't done one single thing wrong? Even if you don't believe in God, you can't surely think that's going to bring you a lot of good karma. And certainly as you celebrate the ability to continue to take innocent lives, that surely can't bring karma. For people that believe in God, such as myself, it is easy to understand why that is described as being so very, very infuriating to a loving God. But that was passed today. I don't think it's constitutional. I think that surely there are people on the Supreme Court, hopefully 5 or 6 anyway, that have believed for years that should have been left to the states and the people. And so for the federal government to jump in and say, we're taking over and we're knocking out all the power of the states and the people to legislate, as Mississippi or Texas or other states have, surely now that will end up being found to be unconstitutional by this body. That's the hope and prayer. When it comes to being callous, sometimes this body just is. And I heard my friend, the majority leader, say that Republicans don't like voting to pay the bills. And he's not quite right on that. I know he means well and wouldn't deceive intentionally. So this isn't engaging in personalities. But he doesn't have that quite right. What Republicans don't like voting on, and voting for rather, is our great-grandchildren having to pay our bills. And if this body next week becomes successful in adding $3 trillion more to our national debt in the shortest amount of time in all of American history, debt that we can never pay back, well, I say never, actually, the only way we could pay back the kind of debt that's being heaped up is if the Biden administration create such runaway inflation that we start having the kind of inflation that Weimar Germany had, where people were having to carry wheelbarrows full of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. If we had that kind of inflation, then yes, money would be so devalued that we probably could pay back our debt. But unless we go through something like that is so economically destructive that there would be Democrats and Republicans alike wanting to have a revolution, we don't want that. We don't need that. We should never allow ourselves to start down that road of having that kind of runaway inflation. Even though it would enable us to pay back the debt, it would be at the cost of total destruction of the nation we love. So, Republicans, we don't mind paying our own way. Good example is that how many Republicans were upset back when President Bush was in his last couple of years of office. And anyway, we had, it may have been the last year we were in the majority as Republicans, but I remember we had 160 billion approximately in the red that year, about 160 billion or so in the red that was going to be added to the national debt. And my Democrat friends across the aisle appropriately pointed out that we should have balanced the budget. We were within $160 billion or so. They were right. We should have balanced the budget. Some of us were upset that we didn't. We were so close. Why not just do it and set that marker and continue down that course? So with a promise that Democrats would be balancing the budget, they won back the majority. And who would have ever dreamed that that $160 or so billion debt in 1 year, in President Obama's first year, would become $1.5 to $1.6 trillion debt in 1 year? Who would have ever believed that the people that said, oh, you had $160 billion in debt, we're going to balance it, we're going to fix it, just put us in the majority. They got the majority, and we ran up nearly 1.6 trillion in debt in 1 year. And it was following that, a year or two later, Standard & Poor's said, you can't keep running up this debt without us having to downgrade the quality of your debt, which means you'll end up paying more interest and you'll end up having to pay more, higher percentage, that is, of your overall revenue for just interest, which means less for Medicare, less for Social Security, less for those that are really in need and we need to help. And Standard & Poor's did exactly that. They downgraded our debt. And as I understand it, if any other rating service had downgraded our debt at the same time, interest rates would have shot up for the U.S. government. But fortunately, we got a break. That didn't happen. Didn't get another service. Maybe they were being dishonest in not downgrading our debt because they were right. We were not. Under those Democratic majorities, we were not being true to ourselves and our generation and future generation. We were creating debt that would be passed on for generations to come. And I thought back then, and said as much years ago, that that'd be like an adult going into a bank and saying, I need this massive loan. Well, what's it for? It's because I cannot control my spending. I just can't stop spending. I'm out of control. So I need a big loan. Well, what do you got for security, for collateral? Well, I brought my children and grandchildren in here, And so I'm going to make them sign off so that they will guarantee all the debt I'm running up because I can't control my spending. Well, no banker in their right mind would loan money, but as the federal government, we don't have to have a banker agree to it. We just agree to it. And we even have people who become jubilant. Wow, we were able to just add another $3 trillion to the backs of our great-great-grandchildren someday. Why? Because we just can't control our spending. That is surely immoral. That is what Republicans don't like voting for, putting more debt on future generations' children. And so Republicans were wrong. We should have balanced that budget when we were in $160 billion of doing so, instead of failing to do that, which enabled the Democrat majority to run up 1.5, 1.6 trillion in 1 year. And boy, did that blow the lid off the debt. And yes, after that, both parties were just busy raising the debt, all kinds of gimmicks to raise the debt. But at some point, we're going to have to either say, this has got to stop, or we're going to finish destroying this country. And again, I think it's a moral issue. Are you moral enough not to make future generations pay for what you refuse to? And I hope the answer is no, we're not going to do that. We're going to, at some point, start being responsible. But here in Washington, it is a malady that seems to set in for so many in either party that get here and then find, wow, we've got so much power. Look what we can do. Since we know so much better than anybody else in the country, even though their IQ may be 40 points higher than our own, we need to make decisions because overall we're smarter. So, it's hard not to get very cynical here in Washington. And I've used the quote before that, Washington saying, no matter how cynical you get, it's never enough to catch up. I think my chief of staff has caught up now. She's gotten pretty cynical. But when you see the hundreds of billions of dollars that are at stake for pharmaceutical companies, who I have applauded the way the Trump administration got red tape out of the way to get to a vaccine in record times, even though the current president, vice president said as long as Trump was president, they wouldn't trust it. Now they're not only trusting what President Trump got done, but forcing people to have the vaccinations who have serious reservations, who are familiar with the issue of informed consent, one of the greatest developments in the history of healthcare, that maybe it has been only 100 years in the whole history of man. Out of the thousands of years of recorded history, maybe 100 years is all we've had, some medical historians say, of living at a time when you had a better chance of getting well after seeing a doctor than of getting worse. So you think about the thousands of years. You had a better chance of getting sicker after seeing a doctor than getting well. And we have now lived through incredible handful of decades where not only do you have a better chance of getting well, you were likely to get well. And that continues to be the case as more and more life-saving and life-enhancing developments have been made in medical care, in health care. And yet, the concept I'm talking about that was such a great development for not only healthcare but for freedom is called informed consent. So we're going to be filing next week. It's a bill that addresses this, the National Informed Consent exception or exemption, the NICE bill, NICE, that will allow people, in fact, mandate that each individual make their own decision about vaccination after consulting with their own physician about their own biology of their own body, what they are at risk for, which conditions are more likely to occur with a particular vaccine, which vaccine to use, whether any of them are good for that particular person to use. It troubled me deeply when I was told, gee, if an employer does what President Biden is mandating and says, you're not going to work here unless you get a vaccination. And last I saw, there were over 7,000 deaths that occurred right after getting a vaccination. CDC is careful to say, yeah, but that doesn't mean that just because they died right after the vaccination that the vaccination called it. Okay. But some of them surely did. And a friend in Carthage lost her husband after he got the vaccination. She said she didn't think he should, that it was a good idea because of his condition. He got it, died, and when they opened up, was just full of blood clots, which was one of the risks for the vaccination he took. As she said, he'd be with me today if he had not been vaccinated. Well, those are things a patient needs to talk about with each one's physician, make those decisions, and then give informed consent to get the vaccination. That's what a free nation should do instead of mandating things that could cause death or problems. Thankfully, that's not the high percentage of what will happen, but it depends on your makeup and what the discussion would be. So I hope that we will get this bill passed at some point, whether it's in the next year and a half or in the session after that. But we need to get back to giving people freedom to make informed decisions rather than mandated decisions from a bloated Washington bureaucracy that doesn't know one thing about the biology of an individual patient, about their risk of death. But I started mentioning, I was surprised, even apparently from what I've been told, that even if your employer mandates you cannot work here unless you get a vaccination, you are totally on your own. Even workers' compensation, from what I was advised, even workers' comp will not help you or your family if you become disabled from the vaccination. If you're one of the 7,000 plus that dies, nothing. And Congress, I would like to see it changed, but Congress has protected the pharmaceuticals, so you can't sue them. Maybe we need to make it where any government official that mandates a vaccination that causes death or disability, maybe that government official, we should open that up to tort reform that allows pursuit of that government official that forces somebody to get a vaccination. Because when somebody's forced into something and they're not allowed to have any input whatsoever, they, of course, lost their freedom, but at least give the family a chance. If you're going to force them to do something that kills them, at least allow the family a chance to recover for the loss of the person that the government official or the employer mandated take action that took their lives. Of course, we have the president here. This is a story from September 21st by Charlie Spearing that Joe Biden boasts to United Nations he restored the commitment to the World Health Organization. Well, what that means is, for those that hadn't been following the news, that means that President Biden has restored the commitment of the United States to the best interests of the Chinese Communist Party, because the Chinese Communist Party clearly has tremendous control over the World Health Organization. That was one of the things President Trump found shocking, that we paid hundreds of millions of dollars to the World Health Organization, and they did not act in accordance with the best interests of the United States. China paid, seemed like it was 30 or 40 million, and the World Health Organization helped cover up what occurred in Wuhan. They continued to lie for the Chinese Communist Party. They continued to do the bidding for the Chinese Communist Party. So this story makes clear that actually President Biden now has made sure that the United States is now fully supportive with and for the Chinese Communist Party, along with the World Health Organizations. There's a great article from Justin Haskins with the Federalist that discusses Joe Biden's vaccine mandate is blatantly unconstitutional. And then the article says it's flatly unconstitutional. And it truly is, but we've come to a place in American history, which I guess these things have happened before. There have been ridiculously inane decisions by the Supreme Court in our history. Well, until the Supreme Court acts, this blatantly unconstitutional action by the federal government is allowed to keep taking place. So we will see what happens in the future, but we keep hearing from the other side about how uncaring and hard-hearted Republicans are because of our position about our borders. Well, it wasn't that important to have secured borders before we started providing welfare benefits to American citizens. Once that started occurring, as Milton Friedman pointed out, you must have borders if you're going to have a welfare state. Otherwise, it will be a very short time before your country will cease to exist. And I understand the strategy. The more millions of people we get into this country, especially those that are easily duped and don't speak English, that they are seen as new voters for the Democratic Party. I get that. But for heaven's sake, have a little heart about and for the people that are being lured into this country. The 15,000, 16,000 Haitians that just came in recently weren't coming from Haiti. They were Haitians originally, but they had gone to South America, most of them, some Central America. And when they got word that the Biden administration was slinging open the border, letting anybody come in, terrorists, give us, you're tired, you're poor terrorists that want to destroy our country, come on in, this administration's going to help. Heck, we'll even load up planes in Afghanistan and bring people that we're now hearing are likely terrorists. We'll bring them on in because they may vote Democratic some point. But a caring person would understand these people left Haiti because they couldn't live under the conditions in Haiti. And they went seeking a better life and found it in one country or another until they got word that the border's open. You can come into America because President Joe Biden is not going to send us back. And then for 1,400 of those 15,000, 16,000 Haitians, they were not sent back where they came from, seeking a better life. They were sent back to Haiti, where they hadn't lived in years. And that's why you've seen some of them crying, weeping on television that how could they do this? They brought me back where I couldn't live. I couldn't make a living. I couldn't live. We left here. We were doing better. And then we come to the U.S. because you lured us up there, and now you send us back to the place where we couldn't make a living? I mean, what kind of country does that? What kind of political leaders do that? Well, the answer is this administration. If we had enough compassion for the people of Mexico, Central America, South America, if we had a right kind of compassion, truly caring about the people of those countries, what we would do is secure the border. The hell going on in Mexico because of the corruption from the drug cartels doesn't need to be happening. Why is it happening? Because the United States of America, the home of the brave, the land of the free, we are sending tens of billions of dollars to the drug cartels in Mexico. So they're getting money for bringing people into the U.S. illegally from the people they're bringing, but they don't have enough. Most of them don't have enough money to pay the whole debt. So they're told you can work it off because when you get where we're sending you, and we're going to get the U.S. government to pay to send you where we, the drug cartels, need you to work. And as we've been told in testimony here on the Hill before, there are drug cartels in every city in America. And the U.S. government, as the Border Patrolmen have told me down there, yeah, they call us their logistics. The drug cartels get them across the border, and then we ship them wherever the drug cartels want them to go. This has got to stop. This is an existential threat to America. And as some friends from around the globe have said, you know, we get upset with the United States, but you've got to understand, you know, we see your light of freedom. We see your light going out. And you've got to understand when the light of freedom goes out in America, it will go out around the world. Reagan said, no generation that lost freedom got it back in the same generation. I'm telling you, if we are not more careful in this body, that light will be extinguished, and I don't think it will ever come back till the end of time. We got to be careful what we're doing. We have tremendous responsibility. To whom much is given, of them much is required. We have an awesome obligation, and we're not filling it when we run up a $3 trillion debt, nor when we legislate to kill the most innocent among us. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields.